Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Moon Jae-in meets in Seoul with the Foreign Minister of China, discussing bilateral issues and possibly, it's believed, a summit with Xi Jinping. South Korea celebrates Trade Day. President Moon pledging that Korea will not stop until it's among the top 4 export leaders by pioneering new industries. And South Korea and Japan set a date for their next round of high-level trade talks. December 16th, they'll meet in Tokyo to discuss their export controls, a key point in their trade dispute. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. President Moon Jae-in met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the Blue House this afternoon. We're still waiting to hear what came out of the talks, but expected to have been high on the agenda is a possible summit between President Moon and Chinese President Xi Jinping. That could take place on the sidelines of the trilateral summit between South Korea, China, and Japan, scheduled for later this month in Chengdu. President Xi could also visit Seoul, which would be his first visit since July 2014. The latest round of talks on defense cost sharing between South Korea and the U.S. has come and gone in Washington. Still no specific agreement. The gap between the two sides apparently too big. However, the two sides have agreed to meet again this month for further negotiations. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
South Korea and the U.S. have wrapped up their latest round of negotiations on sharing the cost of stationing American troops on the Korean Peninsula, with no particular breakthrough to report. Seoul's foreign ministry said Thursday that during the talks, South Korea reiterated the need for a fair and mutually acceptable deal that strengthens the alliance and their combined defense posture. It vowed to closely cooperate to strike an agreement, adding that another round of talks will be held in Seoul before the end of December. With the two sides tight-lipped on the specifics of negotiations, it remains to be seen whether they have been able to narrow their differences or if they put new proposals on the table. The previous round of talks was cut short over the price tag and new terms requested by the U.S. Washington is believed to be demanding Seoul pay $5 billion annually, a fivefold increase from what South Korea agreed to pay under the current deal that expires this month. The extra cost would be through adding new articles under their cost-sharing agreement to cover expenditures for supporting U.S. troops' families and conducting combined military exercises. Since 1991, Seoul has shouldered partial costs to pay for South Korean civilians employed by U.S. Forces Korea, the construction of military facilities, as well as other forms of support. Separately, amid speculation the U.S. could slash the number of American troops in South Korea should the cost-sharing talks not proceed as planned. An official at the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff insisted he's unaware of any discussions within the Pentagon regarding the matter. Jeffrey Anderson, Deputy Director for Political Military Affairs for Asia at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said the effectiveness of their organizational structure in South Korea is always being assessed. U.S. President Donald Trump recently added to the uncertainty, saying the benefits of Washington's military presence at current levels are debatable. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Last month, Seoul conditionally suspended the termination of its military intelligence sharing pact with Japan, and a U.S. State Department official has said the U.S. is encouraged by the decision. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
Washington has shown its satisfaction with South Korea's decision to conditionally suspend the termination of the General Security of Military Information Agreement with Japan. Mark Napper, the State Department's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Korea and Japan, said the U.S. is encouraged by Seoul's decision. He said it sends a very positive message to like-minded allies that even countries with ongoing disputes can cooperate with each other to deal with difficulties they are facing together. The remarks came at a conference on the South Korea-U.S. military alliance in Washington on Wednesday local time. He added that the U.S. is going to support South Korea and Japan's efforts to improve their relationship and further find ways to strengthen their trilateral relations with the U.S. Napper also used the term maintain instead of renew when talking about Seoul's recent decision on the Military Intelligence Sharing Pact with Japan. Previously, the State Department has used the term renew to describe Seoul's decision, and observers have raised concerns that this term might be Washington's way of making GSOMIA's renewal an established fact. Observers suggest Napper's use of maintain could be to reflect South Korea's position that the termination is only conditionally suspended. Meanwhile, Napper also mentioned the subject of Washington transferring operational control back to South Korea. He said that through joint efforts to realize the opcon transition, South Korea and U.S. will make the alliance stronger, more capable, and better able to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Earlier this week, U.S. President Donald Trump said he would use military force against North Korea if necessary. Now the North has responded by saying it too can use force if it has to. Lee Seung-jae reports.
In a statement carried on Wednesday by the North's state-run Korean Central News Agency, Park Jung-chun, the chief of the General Staff of the Korean People's Army, said the use of armed forces is not the privilege of the U.S. only, indicating the regime could also resort to just action if necessary. He added anyone can guess with what action Pyongyang will answer if the U.S. takes military action against the regime. The North's threat came just hours after President Trump told reporters at a NATO summit in London that Washington could use force against the North if it must. Touting the U.S. military as the most powerful in the world, President Trump urged the North's leader to honor their agreement to denuclearize. The North Korean official said Kim Jong-un was displeased to hear Trump's remarks and insisted the only thing preventing a physical conflict between the two sides is the close relations between the two leaders. Observers say the North is conveying a strong message to the U.S., indicated by the timing of the announcement. The North Korean officials' remarks were made in the morning Eastern Standard Time and during the day in Europe, where President Trump was attending the NATO summit to make sure the message was heard loud and clear right away. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
European countries on the UN Security Council have denounced North Korea's ballistic missile launches. The statement condemning the North's 13 separate launches since May was issued on Wednesday after a closed-door meeting of 6 European members, including the United Kingdom and Germany. The U.S. did not take part. North Korea on Wednesday warned the UN not to discuss its human rights situation, saying that would be a serious provocation. North Korea's envoy to the UN said Pyongyang would, quote, respond strongly because that would be an act of siding with the U.S. Renowned scholars, leaders, artists, and activists from around the world are gathered in the South Korean capital for the 2019 Seoul Peace Conference. At the first day of the two-day event, an expert on nuclear diplomacy shared his views on the prospects for denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Ji-young reports.
Denuclearization, one of the most important peace-related issues on the Korean Peninsula, was a popular topic during Wednesday's discussions in Seoul. At the conference, Dr. Siegfried Hecker, a nuclear scientist at Stanford University who has been committed to nuclear diplomacy, talked about the current prospects for denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. Hecker said that in spite of the failure of the second North Korea-U.S. summit in Hanoi earlier this year, he thinks it's best time since the turn of the century to start taking reciprocal and decisive steps towards denuclearization and the normalization of ties. He says this is because the current governments in South Korea and the U.S. don't hold particularly hostile policies towards the North. However, he stressed that North Korea and the U.S. should engage in negotiations and must quickly reach an agreement. But as it stands, there is a problem. North Korea is not listening.
President Moon has said he's ready to go. He's tried to take steps, but then it's just become impossible. And in fact, one of the most disconcerting things of North Korea, essentially, the way I would put it, not answering the phone, to the American negotiations team.
Hecker also drew lessons from history by listing the countries that were once known to possess nuclear weapons. He said South Africa provides meaningful lessons for the Korean Peninsula because the country gave up its nuclear weapons in an honorable and verifiable manner.
It takes for a country to decide, look, they are really more of a risk than they are a benefit to our country. South Africans made that decision that I show here. They say a nuclear deterrent had become not only superfluous, but in fact an obstacle to the development of South Africa's international relations.
Hecker says that once Pyongyang believes its security can be guaranteed without nuclear weapons, it may view its arsenal as a needless burden like South Africa did in the 1990s. Ji-young, Arirang News.
President Moon's nominee for Justice Minister, lawmaker Choo Mi-ae of the ruling Democratic Party, spoke this morning to reporters and said the public is strongly demanding judicial reform, and she vowed to do her best to meet that demand. Take a listen.
Our citizens sincerely want a judicial branch that focuses on people's rights and livelihoods. I think President Moon's offer could be understood as an invitation to work together with the administration to achieve the public's aspirations.
Choo Mi-ae has served 5 terms in liberal administrations and a political career that spans more than 20 years. She served before as a judge at several district courts as well as the Gwangju High Court. Choo's nomination comes around 50 days after former Justice Minister Cho Guk stepped down over corruption allegations involving his family. Choo is now required to go through the National Assembly's confirmation hearing within the next 20 days. If she's appointed, that'll raise the number of female ministers in the Moon administration to 6. Researchers have confirmed a previously unknown type of tomb from the ancient kingdom of Gaya. The tomb is in Gochang County in Gyeongsang-namdo Province. The county office announced on Wednesday that they found stone tombs arranged in the shape of an uppercase letter H, something the researchers that excavated them said hasn't been seen in other Gaya tombs. Researchers also found artifacts such as an iron axe, gold earrings, glass beads, and jade necklaces. Based on the findings, the tombs are estimated to be from the late 5th or early 6th century. President Moon Jae-in says South Korea will not stop advancing until it's a world leader in exports. He was addressing around 2,000 trade company representatives and employees at the annual Trade Day celebration at COEX this morning. Here's what the president had to say.
우리가 지금까지 세계를 무대로 경제를 발전시켜 왔던 새로운 시대 또한 무역이 만들어갈 것입니다. 2030년 세계 4대 수출 강국이 되는 그날까지 우리는 멈추지 않을 것입니다.
President Moon highlighted how Korean firms are overcoming the challenges posed by Japan's export curbs by using the restrictions as an opportunity to localize parts and materials technology. He also pointed out that South Korea maintained a trade value of over $1 trillion for the 3rd time this year, despite the U.S.-China trade war and the global economic slowdown. But the president says the country must find new export engines because there are new challenges like the 4th Industrial Revolution. He promised to nurture cosmetics, batteries, and food alongside the major new industries, system semiconductors, biohealth, and future cars. This particularly through regulatory reform. South Korea's current account surplus has fallen on year for the 8th consecutive month, recording $7.8 billion in October. That's down over 17% compared to the same period last year. Korea had a smaller deficit in the services account, but its surplus in goods plunged on year by around 25%. Both exports and imports fell by double digits due to the slowdown in global trade. South Korea and Japan will hold talks over export control-related issues in Tokyo on December 16th. Seoul's trade ministry said the two sides have agreed on the agenda and date following a preparation meeting in Vienna on Wednesday. Director General level representatives from Korea's Trade Ministry and Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry will meet for 7 hours starting at 10 a.m. on December 16th in Tokyo. This marks the first time in over 3 years that the two sides will discuss export controls. The two sides are expected to discuss export management of sensitive technology and the two countries' export control systems. Just one day after it was reported the U.S.-China trade war could drag on past the 2020 U.S. presidential election, there's a fresh sense of optimism that the two sides could soon strike a deal. Choi Jung-yoon reports.
There has reportedly been a somewhat of an optimistic shift in the trade talks between Washington and Beijing. This comes just 24 hours or so after President Trump suggested on Tuesday that the negotiations could drag on past the 2020 U.S. presidential election, which is still some 11 months away. Bloomberg cited sources on Wednesday as saying Trump's comment should not be seen as an indication that there's an impasse in the negotiations. According to the report, U.S. negotiators expect a Phase 1 trade agreement with China to be completed before a tariff deadline set for mid-December. The U.S. has threatened to impose 15% levies on an additional $160 billion of Chinese imports by December 15th. Adding to the new sense of optimism, President Trump himself made more positive comments on Wednesday on the sidelines of NATO summit in the UK.
We just want fairness. We have to have fairness in trade. We're talking to China, as you know, those discussions are going very well, and we'll see what happens.
Reuters reports that Jared Kushner, a senior advisor to his father-in-law, President Trump, is taking a bigger role in the China trade talks, and his direct involvement is also boosting confidence. Kushner has reportedly taken on a greater role in the talks with China over the past 2 weeks. Kushner played a pivotal role in the latter stages of U.S. trade negotiations with Canada and Mexico in 2018 to replace the North American Free Trade Agreement with the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. 최정윤, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Song Soo-young, professor of business at Chungang University. Dr. Song, thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me again.
Well, today we see Korea's current account surplus in October did grow slightly to a 12-month high. It was the 6-month Korea was back in the black. But the problem is exports were down sharply and so were imports. So it's hard to say, isn't it, that this is a sign of economic health?
Yeah, I agree with that that opinion. And actually, this is, even though this is a preliminary report released by the Bank of Korea, even though we have some current accounts surplus in October, which was recorded as slight decrease from the last year October by the almost $1.7 billion US dollars value. But however, we have, according to the data, that the exports and particularly the balance of goods has been decreased and a lot. So that means that we have to make an adjustment in the economy because our dependency on the dependency ratio over the trade is too big. So I think this might indicate our government and our economy should make some adjustment, a portfolio of the economy, rather while decreasing the reliance on the international trade and then focusing on some domestic demand, improvement of the domestic demand.
Got it. Well, this week we have Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in town. Also talks taking place between South Korea and Japan on trade issues. These, of course, are countries with very close ties to Korea economically. With this diplomacy happening, what do you see down the pipe?
Yeah, I think that is going to be our trading direction could be a little bit under adjustment because I have looked into some data dating from the 2010, and I have seen in the Bank of Korea data that has shown the current account against China has been shown surplus and is increased from 2016 and onward. And that is accompanied by the increase of the balance of goods, which means the current account surplus is largely due to the increase of the net export to China. So that reminds me of the situation that was very worst in the adoption of the THAAD missile anti-defense system in 2013 and 14 so that was the worst time between China and Korea. But since then, I have seen the current account and the balance of goods, the net export to China is increasing. Very interestingly, I have found also the current account surplus in Southeast Asia has been increased a lot. That is accompanied also. So Now, this data, according to data, and then the recent summit conference which was held in Busan, that has indicated the current government policy to diversify some trading route, and particularly focus on the Southeast Eastern Asian area is that comes to be. I expect it would be fruitful and beneficial to our economy.
Do you see progress on the Japan situation?
For the Japan, even though there is a current account, always we have a current account deficit, and then the size of deficit is decreasing. I mean the number of deficit is decreasing. But however, that is not because of we understand the dispute between the Korea and Japan since the last June and July. Therefore, this is going to be not easily settled down. But anyway, as long as we have found the supply of the raw materials which was imported from Japan in the past, that has been changed, and then as long as we can find some domestic supplier of those raw materials and the other areas in China, maybe in other countries, that
right.
Yeah, that would be anyway our dependency and on Japan's import of raw materials will be reduced. So that would be also turns out to be good.
And briefly about the U.S.-China situation, we've been getting mixed signals. So this has caused some major volatility in stocks. What's the story in the global markets, or the factors that you see driving trade in the months to come?
Yeah. Currently, the Wall Street has experienced the largest increase of the equity prices, particularly S&P 500, and the index has been. So that's why the recent fluctuation of and the setback of the index could reflect, rather than influenced by just a statement made at the NATO summit by U.S. President Trump. Rather, that should be interpreted as some kind of a little adjustment, because U.S. equity market has been increased too much. Therefore, it is subject to some kind of adjustment for the purpose of the hedging the risk or the future, because December 15th is a very critical day, and then.
Indeed, yeah, that's a date we're going to be watching for sure, coming up in just about 10 days now. All right, Dr. Song, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, new figures show babies born in South Korea last year are expected to live an average of 82.7 years. The figure, though, is the same as the year before, the first time in half a century that the country's life expectancy has not gone up. Kim Jae-hee reports.
Data from Statistics Korea released Wednesday show that life expectancy of South Korean babies born in 2018 was 82.7 years, the same as the year before. This is the first time the figure has not risen since data was first collected in 1970. Statistics Korea says that's because the country's death rate, which is a factor in life expectancy, rose last year due to a spike in elderly deaths during last year's exceptionally cold winter.
The reason life expectancy remained similar to the year before is because of a surge in the number of elderly deaths in 2018. Last January and February were exceptionally cold. It was South Korea's coldest winter since 1973. Due to the cold weather, there was a rise in elderly deaths from pneumonia.
Still, South Korea's life expectancy is higher than the OECD average for both genders. Females are expected to live an average of 85.7 years, exceeding the OECD average by 2.4 years. Males are projected to live 79.7 years, exceeding the average by 1.7 years. South Korean females are expected to live about 6 years longer than males. The gender gap reached its peak in 1985 with 8.6 years and has been narrowing since then. Data also showed that a 40-year-old man in 2018 will likely live for another 40.8 years, while a 40-year-old woman is expected to live 46.5 years more. For those aged 60 in 2018, men are predicted to have 22.8 years left, and women 27.5 years. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
(2016년 9월 28일) 부정청탁 및 금품 등 수수의 금지에 관한 법률